The East African Community, made up of Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda, is working to move from just an intergovernmental organization to one that has deeper economic ties. This is where the East Africa Monetary Union and the single currency drive come into play. Monetary unions and common currency areas are not new to Africa. The West African Economic and Monetary Union was formed in 1994 and shared the CFA franc among 8 West African countries. Namibia, Swaziland, and Lesotho have been linking their currencies to the South African rand under a common monetary area established in 1986. The East African Monetary Union is an important stage in the process of the EAC's regional integration. The EAMU protocol was adopted in accordance with the EAC Treaty and signed in November 2013. It lays the groundwork for a monetary union within 10 years and allows the EAC partner states to progressively converge their currencies into a single currency in the community. In the run-up to achieving a single currency, the EAC partner states should harmonize monetary and fiscal policies, harmonize financial payment and settlement systems, and also harmonize financial accounting and reporting practices, as well as policies and standards on statistical information. Recently, the Committee of Central Banks of East African Community member states have said there have been delays in realizing targets set out for the monetary union. The committee added that several challenges could further impede the timely implementation of the EAMU protocol, and the 2024 targets may not be met. So what's causing the delays? Is there any way the EAC can meet the 2024 deadline? What does the EAC stand to gain from the EAMU and a single currency? Today, the focus is on the EAC single currency target that's facing challenges. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Ken Gichinga. He's the Chief Economist, Mentoria Economics. Ken, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me. Ken, can you hear me? Hello, Ken. Are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Morning to you. Well, I think it is afternoon your time. Once again, thank you. So let's go straight into this. Now, the idea of a common currency for economic blocs has been something that we've seen discussed in a regional basis across the African continent. But it seems to have been a very big struggle for African economies and these blocs to make this happen. Leaving aside the CFA franc, and we know, of course, the controversy surrounding that, why have we struggled to come about these regional common currencies as much as we would have liked?
Thanks for having me, Tolulope, and that's a fantastic question. When we look at monetary union, one of the big things that needs to happen before monetary union is political union. When you study monetary history, going all the way back to Greek antiquity, and you look at the writings of Aristotle, he says money, which in Greek is nomisma, is a creature of the law, which is nomos. So the idea that you can separate the law from money is actually very recent and completely wrong. And that's what has misguided policymakers, not just in Africa, but across the world. So the importance of having a common political constitution is a precursor to having a monetary currency. And that's what you find in the United States, where they have a common constitution, the dollar works extremely well. But in the EU, where they have 27 nations with 27 constitutions, they've been having challenges over the last 20 years. So it's an important lesson that we in Africa have to learn.
I like the fact that you bring up the EU. So then I have to ask, if we're still seeing the EAC move towards a single currency, we're seeing the West African side, monetary union, also trying to move towards a common currency. What then do we say about all of this when we're still having the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the idea that there will be a single currency on the African continent? Can these two things or these two ideals in a way sort of exist side by side?
No, absolutely not. And that's the confusion that continues to guide policymakers. But I can't blame them. Monetary history is something that is not taught in universities anymore. Even if you go to the best universities, very few universities offer modules on monetary history. And I think that's one of the things that need to change. Now, to change the direction of things, if these countries want to have a common currency, they have to contemplate first having a common constitution. Only then can you be able to contemplate the possibility of having a common currency. But even having that political unity is not easy. Even in the East African community with the member states, there's such a big variation in political vision, political direction. And that's probably one of the reasons that it has been remained a pipe dream.
So after a meeting recently, the committee that's in charge said that the delays in realizing the targets set out for the East African Monetary Union roadmap have sort of been enormous. So let's talk about some of these delays. What delays are being encountered right now?
Well, typically they have what is called the Macroeconomic Convergence criteria. And they argue that you need to have common levels of inflation, common levels of public debt. You need to have some similarities in the nature of your fiscal policy, your monetary policy. And those are the things that they have been targeting. But as I said, these nations are independent and sovereign in their nature. So the nature of their fiscal policy varies significantly because one country, the idea of government is to have a big government, but in another country, the idea of government is to have minimal government. So you can see how the change even in fiscal policy is tied to the political vision of the country. And that's why it's critical that we emphasize that without a political union, it's almost impossible to have a functioning monetary union.
So are the countries working towards adjusting this? Because what you're bringing up is also some of the issues we've seen on the West African Monetary Union side in terms of moving towards the single currency, that's the ECO, this issue of converging fiscal debt, public debt, as well as the macroeconomic convergence as well. So has there been progress for these countries? Because it's interesting that there's a 10-year roadmap. The deadline is set for 2024 now with about one or two adjustments, but these things are not things that are resolved overnight. They're not resolved in 1 or 2 years. These countries had many, many years to sort of resolve these issues. So has any progress been made?
Well, there has been setting up what they call the East African Monetary Institute, looking at statistics across the region, and all those are well and good. But unless there's a real conversation on constitutionality between the countries, unless that conversation reaches that phase, it's going to be extremely difficult. When you look at West African currencies, indeed, France has dominated the common currency. And I would say one of the reasons that you find to have widespread poverty, particularly in those regions, is because those countries have lacked the sovereignty to be able to conduct their own monetary policy that is in line with their own national vision. So it's extremely important that sovereignty and monetary policy, currency, are aligned. They are put at the same, given the same priority.
So are these the only challenges that have been basically delaying the implementation of this or the full rollout along the roadmap? Is there anything else that's causing issues for this implementation?
Well, there are a number of issues. As I said, if you look at the criterion, the convergence criterion, it's a whole list of things around foreign exchange policies, public debt policies, fiscal policies. So there is a whole list of indicators, and each of those countries has a different direction, and they've tried to harness them into one. But you find the priorities on one country might want to have lower public debt for one reason, but another country might want to have a higher public debt. So those has been the challenges, to check the boxes on all those criteria to create a uniform society without uniform constitutions. That really is the essence of the delays.
Ken, what I'm getting from you is that there is, one, a lot more work to be done, but then two, this difference in constitution, political and economic vision as well is a very big stumbling block. So I have to ask then, what is the point of EAC or any of the regional blocks here on the continent pushing towards a single currency? We know that they had even mulled the idea of the East African shilling from almost 3 decades ago. But the first time the idea collapsed after the first EAC integration absolutely collapsed, then you know the project has been renewed since 2000. But it's just now that even South Sudan has been able to start working towards the full implementation. At the end of the day, what does the EAC gain from a single currency if we're still having these issues and there's not a unified, allied, and aligned vision?
That's a profound question, Tolulope. And I'd say this is really an element of globalization, which not only affects Africa, but is a global effect where regions move towards single currency. Quite often, these globalization tendencies are pushed by big businesses that tend to look for bigger markets for their products. But it's an element of globalization. And I think one of the great books by Larry Summers, Globalization and Its Discontents, talks about the challenges when you have the benefits of globalization, but it also has its discontents, where you have nations and you have populations that have huge unemployment, but those issues take a secondary stage because there's that obsession with creating bigger markets for bigger goods. So it's really a question of, how do we become members of a global society which has its benefits, but also how do we maintain the individual nature of our sovereign states, which also has its policies. One of the key things when you look at monetary policy, its ability to measure unemployment. And many of these African countries do not apply the tools of monetary policy to look at unemployment in those countries. And thus we find unemployment is extremely high, particularly in those countries. So I think it's a call, as you say, for a lot of work, a lot of deeper intellectual thinking about how can we integrate, but also maintain our unique diversities. That will be the conversation moving forward.
All right, and we're also going to move forward with this conversation. When we come back from the break, let's look at the potential as to how this could even happen while the EAC is seeing a number of trade disputes ongoing between member states, and also look at the milestones that have been set forward. So the single currency is just the third pillar of the integration. There's the common markets and, of course, the trade one. But there's positives to be found. So, Ken, we'll pick up the thread of that conversation when we come back. You are watching Business Edge, and we're looking at the conversation around the East African community trying to put together a single common currency and, of course, moving towards the East African Monetary Union implementation. The conversation continues after this. My guest is the chief economist from Mentoria Economics, joining me from Nairobi, Kenya, as we look at the challenges the EAC is facing in bringing about a single currency. Now, Ken, when it comes to this single currency conversation, there are often concerns about how strong economies can be tied to weaker economies. And in this conversation, you're looking at possibly a Kenya and Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, and now even most especially South Sudan that's still quite struggling in it. What concerns do you have if, let's say, a single currency was to take off tomorrow, let's put it at that? What concerns should some of the stronger economies have? You've talked about unemployment already, inflation as well. What would really tie them together that would be of concern?
That's absolutely spot on. When you look at Europe, for example, you have very strong economies like Germany, and sometimes you have very weak economies like Greece, particularly during after the 2008 crisis. And these two countries could not see eye to eye because the policies that would work for Germany would be debilitating for Greece. And the same will happen in a place that, in a common currency, for example, in East Africa, where you have different ambitions, when you have different expectations. And that's why I can't emphasize it enough that the lack of political vision to be able to have a common vision politically must predate the economic vision, because when you have three countries that politically are pulling in different directions. If you look at Kenya and Tanzania, Kenya is an extremely capitalistic society, where private properties are very key. When you look at Tanzania, which sort of like has a socialism in place under the Ujamaa, which has been there for quite a while, then you find societies that really have a completely different vision about the future. And if you put a common currency around them, you're only going to create things that will not be sustainable. So the need to identify common political vision is extremely important, even before that economic vision.
All right, so leaving the single currency situation aside, let's even look at the East Africa Monetary Union in light of the trade disputes that have been happening in the region. Just recently, Rwanda and Uganda resolved a 3-year border closure dispute. And we've also seen this back and forth happening between Kenya and Uganda when it comes to agricultural products. How can all of this be happening? And these are the same countries that say they're working towards a monetary union and working towards the third pillar of integration, which is the common currency. And that's what you've mentioned in terms of being pulled in different directions politically. But when you have such trade disputes, do you think these are partners who are facing the right and the same direction?
That situation normally arises because the different groups are incentivized differently. The people who complain about the border, the trade wars, sometimes tend to be your farmers and your merchants across. And for them, it's about getting new markets, looking for new markets across the board. But the people, again, who think about the complete economy of the region, when you look at inflation and public debt, tend to be in a whole different camp altogether. And because these two entities tend to operate in silos separately, that's why you end up with a situation where you have almost two outcomes that are in opposition to each other. I think the only way forward in East Africa community first has to be able to look at the countries in of themselves. What is the possibility of them ever having a common constitution, for example? And if that is an impossibility, then we should absolutely drop all ideas of having a common currency.
Ken, let me plainly ask you, are you in support of the EAC working towards a single common currency?
I think it's an unlikely goal, having a common currency. Just if you travel within the East African community, you should probably do a vacation to some of these countries. You'll notice there's extreme differences amongst the countries. So for them to have a community that is able to speak to issues together, to speak to support each other from a security perspective, to be able to have a common vision, I think that's a possibility. But the ability to integrate them into a common currency when some of the countries don't even have the basic tools of monetary policy, when others have a bit more sophisticated, is a bit unrealistic.
All right, so in terms of the milestones, because they have said they've laid out this roadmap and they have these milestones, let's look at some of those now. The milestones include the creation of key institutions such as the East African Monetary Institute, which would lead the union, also harmonization of monetary exchange rate policies and regulatory frameworks, strengthening of regional payment systems, enhancements of cybersecurity framework, and more. If you leave all of that aside in terms of having this harmonized for one union, the individual work that the countries are doing, even just for it to be of benefit to themselves, is that work being done?
There's always benefits in trying to seek partnerships, whether it's trade alliances, whether it's security pacts, whether it's a common position on a regional issue. The nature of the world we are living in is you can't live by yourself. You have to be part of a community. And if you look at the foundations of the East African community and how they collapsed in the 1960s and 1970s, I don't think policymakers have tried to understand the things that made that East African community collapse for a period of 40 years before it was revived in 2000. So by all means, to your answer, yes, there's great value in seeking common partnerships, but we need not hard countries into having a common currency, particularly because the nature of their monetary policy might be unique to respond to local issues on inflation and unemployment that may be different from country to country.
I'm going to put you on the spot with this last question because everything you're telling me says that the struggle for a regional common currency is very high, which therefore means the struggle for an African common currency is also high as well. Do you think in our lifetime we'll see a single African currency?
I mean, we might see it. We might see it even in East African country. The question you want to ask is, will it lift the standards of livelihood amongst Africans? Because that's the whole objective of economics, to lift the standards of livelihood. So you can have a common currency in the space of a year. Nothing stops countries from that. But the question is, will that common currency be able to attend to the unique needs of each of the 54 countries, each that have a very different natures of unemployment, very different nature of inflation? That is the hard part, and the evidence that has been put forward, particularly if you look at the struggles of the European Union, really do not point to evidence that's unimpeachable.
All right, we'll leave it at that for now. While the milestone has been set, we'll see what the EAC can pull out in terms of bringing on the West African Monetary Union and that single currency. Ken, thank you as always for joining me.
Thank you very much.
And 2024 was the deadline that was set, but in a recent virtual meeting, that deadline has now been cast in doubt. What's going to be the future of the West African Monetary Union and the drive for a single currency in the EAC? It's only time that will tell, but as we have more information, you'll have the latest. This is Business Edge. Up next is NC4 to watch. And these are the stories that we're keeping our eyes on right now. Transport Cabinet Secretary James Machari has appointed Emil Nguza Arau as the Director General of the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority for a period of 3 years. And the appointments will see Arau take over the position from Gilbert Kibe, who exits the state corporation next month after serving 2 3-year terms. Oil prices stabilized on Friday and were on track for their biggest weekly drop since November after seesawing on fears of escalating bans on Russian oil versus efforts to bring more supply to the market from other major producers. Brent crude futures inched down to $109.17 a barrel after dropping 1.6% in the previous session. U.S. WTI crude futures were up to $106.04 a barrel, following a 2.5% decline that happened on Thursday. Nigeria's defense headquarters says troops of Operation Delta Safe have discovered and deactivated about 30 illegal crude oil refining sites in Rivers, Bayelsa, Delta, and Abia states. In the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, one of the largest oil producers of Africa, illegal refining is a dangerous common practice among local people who sometimes boil crude oil in drums to extract fuel after vandalizing pipelines. And finally, South African breweries have signed a power purchase agreement with industrial-scale biogas waste-to-energy company Bio2Watt. The renewable energy will be supplied from the Cape Dairy biogas plant once it reaches commercial operation. And it's a wrap this week for Business Edge. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, download our mobile app, and watch us on the platforms we are available. And for all the latest in African business, the economy, and finance, don't forget to tune in 11 a.m. West African time, Monday through Friday for Business Edge. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Have a good one.